Hello, everybody, and welcome to my review of Picard, Season 1, Episode 3. The end is just the beginning. Okay, now, before I start, I just want to say I love this show. This show is amazing. Like, I was really excited for it because it was about Picard, but I didn't expect it to enjoy it as much as I am. It's just awesome. So let's get right to it. Okay, so this episode begins after the events of Mars. And so Rafi and Picard are talking about a meeting that Picard just had with the higher ups of Starfleet about continuing the rescue mission. They've decided that after everything that's going to happen at Mars and with the synthetics, that they need to not only ban synthetic life forms, but they just don't have the resources to continue with the rescue mission. Now, before I go any further, can I say that those uniforms are fire? All right, like I was one of those people that really liked the DS9 uniforms when they were first put out there, but this ticket takes the DS9 to another level, and I think they're just awesome. So I just want to say that. Like, I wish that those were the uniforms that they had like now, or those were the uniforms for a new series, because I love looking at those. Okay, anyway. So Rafi still wants to continue the fight. Like, she believes that something's going on, that something is weird. You know, she even is suspecting that the Romulans are somehow involved in this. Now, Picard refuses to believe this, okay? He believes that it's impossible for there to be some type of Romulan conspiracy. Why would they want to sabotage their own rescue mission? He's just not here for it, right? Rafi, however, is convinced that she's right, but she's not really going to argue that point. She's just trying to figure out what can they do to keep this going. So Picard drops the bombshell that he has tendered his resignation, and she can't believe it, right? She she knows Picard as a fighter, and she's expecting him to come up with one last desperate ploy. And what I like about this scene is that in the past he would have. That's the Picard that we know, from watching Next Generation. This is the guy that in the very last second would figure things out and make it right and make it work. In this case, that didn't happen. He tendered his resignation. He said that was his last desperate ploy. Because again, he didn't expect them to accept it. He's John freaking Luc Picard, the hero of the Federation. And he was actually shocked when they took it. And so Rafi is kind of like, well, now what? She becomes sort of instantly angry and bitter about it. And she, taunts him about him going back to his chateau and writing books and just kind of giving up. And, in a way he has. He talked about in the last episode or about, letting perfect get in the way of what was right, or the last episode of this next episode. I'm sorry, I might be getting confused, but he does mention that, and that's kind of what he's doing here in this particular instance. And so they get word that they want to see Rafi, and Rafi instantly knows that her life is about to change, right? Either she's going to get fired or demoted, or something's going to happen, and she's just pissed, all right? And we're led to believe that that is the last time that they had seen each other for the next 14 years, which kind of sucks. And so we flash forward to them talking about sort of what's going on. And Rafi is living sort of in this little trailer. Okay, so I want to talk about this for a second. In Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, and I'm going to be referring to classic Trek, Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, as Gene Roddenberry's Trek, right? Because those are basically the Trek that he sort of had his hands on and still sort of had his sort of worldview. Voyager had that to some extent, but it was created after his death. Enterprise, the least I say about Enterprise, the better, because I was not a fan. Discovery is something totally brand new. Picard has that vein of Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek because it's based on Picard, which is, was based on Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future. But so when I refer to Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, I'm referring to things from classic Trek all the way up to Deep Space Nine. So in Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, there was really no such thing as economic hierarchies, right? We were led to believe, that money was no longer important, that poverty didn't exist, that Earth was a utopia. I even remember, like, in the end of Deep Space Nine, when Miles came back to Earth for his assignment, O'Brien said, enjoy your life back on Paradise, right? So the fact that she, talks about Picard, she saw him on, the TV or the hologram newsnet or whatever, and his fine home and his, with all of his nice things, and she's living in this trailer, that's a different type of conversation than we've had in Trek before. To me, the whole thing was like, well, yeah, when we saw Picard, he grew up in a chateau. That was just his ancestral home. It didn't particularly have anything to do with money or finances in my mind. It was just what his family did. Like, they raised grapes on their vineyard, just like Picard was a captain, like, in outer space. And so, this whole idea that Earth is not as perfect as we have been led to believe, which of course goes back to, because if Earth was so great, why are people like mining things on Mars? Like, we never got that too, because I don't think that would be my choice of, jobs if I lived on a utopia. So it's really kind of interesting how this is kind of shaken up, and how we're seeing Earth kind of different than how Gene Roddenberry kind of described it. Another thing too is she starts to chastise Picard for not checking in on her. And I find that to be so interesting, all right? Because Picard, has become a man who seems to be defined by loss. And he's mourning Dana, like 20-something years after his loss. I'm sure he's mourning, like, the life that he had with his crew on the Enterprise, who became sort of like his family. But here he has, like, another family that he's created with Rafi, right, who was his first officer, who's familiar enough to call him JL, which we're going to come back to later. And he doesn't, like, talk to her, somebody that's living and breathing and that can use his help, like, in the last 14 years, but he's still sitting around here brooding about Data. Like, it really makes me wonder, like, if he treats Rafi like that, like, when's the last time he talked to Riker or LaForge or Worf? I mean, we're gonna find that out because we're gonna see Riker. Oh, man. But it's just curious, like, how present was he in the real world, or was he just laying on his chateau, dwelling on his failures, dwelling on what if, and not very active participant in what was going on now? So that's kind of, interesting. Anyway, Picard tells Rafi that she was right. There is some type of Romulan conspiracy going on. Rafi is intrigued by this. However, Picard goes one step from being able to admit that Starfleet was involved. Because she's saying there's no way that, there could be a sabotage of that fleet without somebody from Starfleet being involved. Picard refuses to believe this because, despite the problems that he has with Starfleet, there's still a part of him that has this idealistic version of Starfleet and believes that there's nobody in Starfleet sort of capable of that, which I find to be, really interesting. So we go back to the artifact, the Borg artifact, where Hugh and Soji are talking. So for those of you who remember, Hugh is the Borg that was found in Iborg that basically became a human thanks to the love of Geordi and Geordi's friendship. Because Picard was, like, not, like, feeling him at all. Like, he's a Borg, he's a thing, and so that was actually a fantastic episode. If you haven't seen Iborg, please go watch it. What I liked about the introduction of Hugh is that he was important in his own right. Even though we know he's eventually going to meet Picard or whatever, it wasn't so much about his connection to Picard. We're seeing his journey, what happened to him and who he is as a person now. And so I really like that. So Hugh has a lot of respect for Soji because Soji treats former Borg as people. And now this is another thing that I find to be really intriguing, right? How former Borg seem to be treated now in this universe, right? So he talks about how the Borg aren't really considered to be people, right? They're things, right? Um, they are kept in stasis, my understanding is, for a while. And then when they're taken out of stasis, their Borg parts are almost more valuable than they are, right? And they are sort of no longer part of the collective. They're put back into society, but people sort of look at them with suspicion. I think that's very realistic, unfortunately. I think, even though they're victims and they're not responsible for what happened to them, I think that that's probably how like people would react to them with suspicion, which is why it was really interesting that nobody but Cisco, all right, was looking at Picard's side eye after he was no longer assimilated. Like nobody like questioned his integrity. Nobody was looking at him side eye like, are you still connected to them, or like what's going on? So I found this interpretation of people either A, still being suspicious of them, or B, unfortunately just not caring about them because they're the lost, to be kind of the way that things would be. And I'm really interested to see how that is going to like play out later on. Anyway, because Hugh is so impressed by Soji, he agrees to grant her an interview with this Romulan named Rhonda. So Rhonda was one of the few Romulans that ever to be assimilated, and she's also an anthropologist. And that's what Soji is. And so Soji wants to talk to her because she has this theory that a shared memory, a shared mythology can help those people who have been assimilated from the Borg heal. She goes to see her, and things just go haywire because Rhonda recognizes her, all right? And she gets really agitated. And she recognizes her and starts saying, which sister are you? Are you the sister that lives or the sister that dies? So, of course, us as the audience, we understand that she's the sister that lives. And so Rhonda says, in no uncertain terms, that the sister that lives is the destroyer. She's the destroyer. And Soji starts to freak out because she doesn't know what that means, all right? And so, of course, that adds another layer to what's going on because people want to get to Soji because she's the destroyer. But she's the destroyer of what? And why is it that she's so familiar to people? Is she familiar to Picard? Is she familiar to Soji, Aroma, because the thing that they have in common were that they were both assimilated? And is she somehow related to the Borg? That's kind of my theory, and I'm kind of sticking with that, but we're going to kind of see what happens, right? So meanwhile, Rafi tells Picard, to take his, olive branch and shove it. But she doesn't really mean it, right? She tells him that she's not going to go on his mission with him, but she does tell him that she knows a pirate. Not a pirate, I'm sorry, a pilot. Pirate pilot. Enter Santiago Cabrera as Rios. Okay, so I love Santiago. Like, I used to watch the show on the BBC called Merlin. And he played Lancelot, and he was just so, like, fantastic in that. And I've been a fan of his ever since. So I was so excited to see that he was coming on to Star Trek Picard. I love it when actors that I love join the Star Trek family. So I'm looking very much forward to seeing him. From what I can tell, Rio seems to be a very interesting character, charismatic, but he also has a thing for holograms. So he has no crew. Again, I'm sure that has to do something with his past. He's surrounded by holograms, and all the holograms look like him, but with different personalities, okay? So I'm sure there's something else that's going on with that that we're going to find out about. But Picard comes, and Picard sees him, and he's had some kind of accident, and the hologram doctor, which we're introduced to the concept of that in Voyager, is healing him. And for some inexplicable reason, he has an accent. I think he has like an Irish accent. I don't know. He just does. Anyway, Picard knows Rafi well enough to know that she's not really done. Okay, so while all this is happening, Picard knows Rafi enough to know that if he was to introduce him to a pilot, that means she's all in, no matter like what she's saying, right? So he is sending her information about what's going on, about the synth, about Dr. Maddox, and she's like, I don't know why you're sending me this stuff. Like, I'm not looking at it. He's like, yeah. Carry on with your investigation, right? And again, I think it's cute that they like know each other and they feel like a crew. See, my fear was because the chemistry between the Next Generation crew was so magical and that they were so great. My fear was that they weren't going to be able to reconnect any of that type of magic. And I'm not saying it's going to be anything as great as Next Generation or as, you know, perfect, because that to me is a perfect show. But I'm saying that they have the stuff to be interesting in their own right. So I think that's going to be great. Okay, so meanwhile, Rios is pretending, like he's all cool with working with Picard, but he's like super impressed, right? He his doppelganger, the Irish one, was like, oh my god, it's Jean-Luc Picard. I can't do an Irish accent, so and I don't want to like offend anybody by trying. But he starts, listing, saying, that Picard is a great guy, he's a hero. Start listening to all of Jean-Luc's accomplishments and how great it is that's gonna be, working with him. And so we get to see, that even though Rios is acting like this big tough guy, that, he's still very much, like Picard says when he meets him, still very much Starfleet at his core. Still very much a hero. All right, and I like that. So next time we see Picard, he is ready to say goodbye to his vineyard and to Lars and to Japan, right? He thinks that he's actually saying goodbye to his home and his friends for the last time because, again, last week he got a very disheartening medical diagnosis. So he feels like he's dying, basically. And maybe he is dying. I'm hoping that he's not. Maybe I'm in denial about it. But he feels like he's dying, all right? And so, while he's preparing to leave, some thugs, some Romulan thugs, come in and they, start going after him. And then, Lars and Japan, their Tashiar, stuff kicks in. And, they beat him back. And then, of course, typical fashion, one of them is still there. But before they can shoot Picard, Agnes comes in and shoots him. All right? Saving their life. But she's all shaken up because she's apparently never killed anybody before. So meanwhile, one of the Romulans is still alive and they start interrogating him. And he starts going on and on and on about how, the Sith that's still alive, Soji, she's the destroyer. She's the destroyer. All right, and we heard that, and so simultaneously, we heard that before. So they want to know what Agnes is doing there. Agnes informs them that Commodore O and her sunglasses showed up and started interrogating her about why Picard wanted to see her. And she said that she's not a very good liar, so she just told them everything except one thing. So Picard is really kind of understanding about this, which I would have been a little bit more pissed off, but I guess he figures she's not a soldier, so she can't hack an interrogation. But anyway, he says, so what is the one thing that you didn't say? And she said that I'm coming with you, right? And she starts going on and on about how meeting Soji would be the, culmination of her life's work, and she's going to go. So meanwhile, Santiago, Rios, he's like, we gotta go. I heard it through a source that they're after us. Like, let's go, all right? So he beams Picard and Agnes on board, and Rafi is there, okay? So Picard, he knew it. He's thrilled, though. He's thrilled to have his last number one, like, not counting the dog, like, back with him. But she tells him, I found Dr. Maddox. I know where he is, right? He's on, this planet called Free Cloud, right? And so he's like, great. But she's like, you know what? I'm not joining your crew, just so you know. I'm just hitching a ride. And the reason I'm hitching a ride is none of your business, but I'm coming, right? And so then, she turns around and she sees Agnes, who she's not very happy to see. And she makes a comment like, really, we just gonna let this woman roll? Like, we don't know nothing about her. We didn't do no security clearance. Like, why? And Agnes is sort of looking at her in a way that's, impressed. I think part impressed, part intimidated. Like, I don't know. But anyway, they're all on the ship, and the crew is finally together. And Picard starts their new adventure by saying, engaged. All right. So that's basically the episode. All right. I must have watched this episode like 4 or 5 times. That's how much I loved it. I thought that it was great. What Star Trek Picard is doing that I love is that it is creating a good old fashioned sci-fi story, in which it is paralleling things that are happening in the real world in a way that I think is relatable and not too preachy. All right. Now, even though I'm enjoying the show, that's not to say that I don't have nitpicks with it, right? I find some of it to be just way too modern. The dialogue, the things that they're saying to me, it's really too 20th, 21st century. The thing that I liked about Gene Roddenberry's Next Generation is that they didn't talk the way that we talk today. Just like somebody 100 years ago doesn't talk the way that we talk now. The cursing, I don't mind a curse word here or there, but I feel like at this point, they're just trying to be edgy. The same thing with the drinking. Like, we already established in Gene Roddenberry's universe that they didn't actually drink alcohol, like with the exception of Romulan ale. It was mostly like synthehol and synthetic. And maybe some of it did have like the same properties, but they weren't drinking all the time. And the smoking. I don't know how many times in Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek they were like, we don't smoke. Like, humans have given up smoking like hundreds of years ago. We figured out it was killing us. We just don't do it. So why are they smoking and vaping? Like, and cigars and stuff. Like, just cause we cool, we the cool kids, and we gonna drink and smoke and curse. Like, it's just not, to me, it's not necessary. It's the same thing with the sunglasses. I read an article, with the Picard's showrunners talking about some of these things I'm talking about now, and they did explain it, but it's just like, I like the low techness of it, because I felt like the we don't want the tech to be too crazy, because we see that we're not being as technically advanced as we want to. But at the same time, that doesn't, the other stuff is too modern. Like, you got to find sort of that balance with it. Okay, that's my thing. Now, I love the characters. Of course, I love Picard. I love Rios, and I love Rafi. And what I like about them is that they are good guys at their core. None of that, they're smoking or drinking or cursing. They're disillusioned with Starfleet. They're angry. They have issues. But at their very core, you can tell that they're good people and good guys and that they're heroes. And that's what I like, I don't mind, like, my heroes not being perfect, but I like to know that they're heroes. And, that was one of the issues they have with Discovery. They really didn't give you anybody to root for, to like in that first season. And to me, that's not a good way to go, right? So the fact that I know that the 3 of them, no matter what, are heroes, and I can count on them, and at the very core that they're, the best of Starfleet, great. Now, Agnes, on the other hand, I don't trust her. I don't believe for 1 second that she's a little meek, mild person that just can't lie. I think that Dr. O made a deal with her. Find the synth, and I promise you that I will keep the synth alive, and she feels like it's worth it in order to keep the synth alive. Like, she doesn't really know them. She doesn't really know Picard. She knows he's a good guy, but I feel like she's thinking that this lie is going to be sort of for the greater good. And I think the more time she spends with the crew and the more time she bonds with them, and once she figures out that, Commodore O is a crook, I think she's going to regret this alliance, but I think that she has made an alliance with them. Also, I feel like they were doing a chemistry test between her and Rios. Wasn't really feeling it, but again, they just met, so we'll kind of see. I'm always up for a good old-fashioned romance. Not exactly sure I want them to be the romance. I also felt some chemistry between her and Rafi. Oh, now I'm going to talk about like, speaking of romance, so Picard and Rafi's relationship is not really established. Okay, in interviews with Patrick Stewart, unless I'm like recalling them incorrectly, I think there was some insinuation that he thought that maybe there was a romance going on, which I sort of bought into because she was calling him JL. Like, Picard not let anybody call him JL, you know? So the showrunners explain this by saying that they have been through a lot. He been through a lot with the Next Generation crew. they didn't even call him Jean Luc. I think they are maybe now. You know, the first time I saw him say Jean Luc was Gianna in the trailer, because it's been like 20 years since they served together. But you know, so I find that to be really interesting. But so apparently, though, I don't think that with them we're not getting a form of romance, which I think would have been interesting. We're getting more of a father daughter kind of relationship, which is why she was so devastated when she hadn't heard from him. But we'll kind of see what that's going on, and we'll see kind of what Rafi and Rio's past is. Now, having said that, speaking of romance, I think that Soji and is her storyline to me is the weakest link. You know, I'm not really, you know, I don't have to see it every week. You know, she don't have to be on every week. Like, you know, once in a while it's cool. We know who she is. We know that she's the person that we're trying to find. That's good. I'm also not really feeling this twincest thing that's going on, right? I mean, Nerys got more chemistry with his sister than he does with Soji. That's a problem. And again, I don't know if they're doing that because they want to be edgy or what, but, you know, it is what it is, right? So all in all, this was really a great episode. It's shaping up to be very nice. The show, and let me tell you something too. I think the reason why Picard is going to be so successful is because it's a show that knows what it wants to be. Now, I really like Discovery, but I feel like it didn't know what it wanted to be. It knew what it didn't want to be, right? It didn't want to be your grandfather's Star Trek, right? Or your mother, your father's Star Trek. It wanted to be different. So it gave you a first season with a bunch of unlikable characters, right? Because, you know, people are complex and shades of gray. But, you know, we want people to root for it. They tried to course correct in the second season, but the issue that they had was because they sort of created this new sort of canon by her being Spock's sister, and by them being a prequel to the original series, they were coming too close to the timeline, the canon timeline, that they were like, oh shoot, what are we gonna do? So they threw them 1,000 years in the future. So again, the identity of the show is gonna change. So I think Picard knew from the beginning that it was going to be about Picard, and it was going to be about these issues, and it was going to be an extension of the Next Generation, not a reboot, not a replicant, but an extension, a realistic extension of the themes of that show. And I think it's really great, and I really appreciate it, and I'm really enjoying it. And if you're not watching it, you need to be watching it, all right? So if you like this video, please like it. Please subscribe. I'm going to be doing some more reviews of different shows, of Picard, you know, some throwback Star Trek reviews. You know, I'm thinking about doing some X-Files. If there's something that you want me to review, you know, let me know. You know, as you can see or if you haven't seen my amazing, Fall from Grace video, go do that. I do more than just, you know, sci-fi reviews. So, you know, I am looking forward to talking to you guys in my next video. And as always, my one last question that I have in reviewing Picard is, and will always be until it's answered, where's Beverly? Until next time.